Good morning, yogis. This is Melissa Hagedorn with the Northwest Yoga Conference, and thanks for joining us again for another one of our presenter interviews. I'm really excited to have Rob and Melissa Lundsgaard joining us this morning. And yeah, I just want to take a moment to share too that I'm actually doing these videos makes me really nervous because I don't like being on the camera, but I feel like there's a lot of value and worth that they bring to the community, so I just kind of do it anyways. And my husband gave me a little pep talk this morning and told me just to relax and enjoy and just kind of treat it like I'm having tea with friends and stuff. So that's going to be my approach this morning. So anyways, I see Melissa just commented, and so I'm going to see if I can add her here into, yes, okay. And so she'll add in an adventure with Facebook Live, because you never know if all the technical things are going to work out. So we just got it fixed, I think. So
Did we get
Hello.
it?
Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. How's it
Thank you
going?
for joining me today with the Facebook Live and for riding through the couple little techie issues we had to figure out.
We got there in the end, though.
Yeah. So just take a moment to introduce Melissa and Rob. They're well-loved Bhakti Yoga teachers and Kirtan artists in the Seattle yoga community, and actually really beyond, because they have been traveling all over the globe sharing their gifts. And they also have released 2 albums, Bolo, and I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce this right. Tejase. How do you pronounce your second album?
Tejase.
Tejase. Okay. So thanks for being here, and I'm just really excited to get to spend this time with you guys and learn a little bit more about you, even just for myself, because I just don't feel like I get enough time to spend with presenters that are involved with the conference. So it's a treat for me. And yeah, and so one thing I wanted to ask both of you about a little bit was your transition from the non-yoga world into teaching and sharing Kirtan, because one thing that I think is really interesting about people's stories of how they found yoga and Kirtan is that I think there's a lot of people out there who either think yoga isn't for them, or they're a little bit interested but they're kind of scared and to make that step into a yoga class. And I think you guys really brilliantly demonstrate how people from just, you know, kind of regular jobs, whatever, can find their way into this path of yoga. And so I was wondering if you could each share a little bit about your story of where you were in your life before becoming a yoga teacher and a Kirtan artist, and how you made that pathway into that life that you guys have now fully embraced.
Okay. Do you want to start, or do you want me to start?
You start.
All right, I'll start. Well, so it wasn't as dramatic a transition for me as it was for Melissa, because I really never had a 9-to-5 job. I was a filmmaker and a screenwriter before I got into yoga and to Kirtan, and so although so it was, and I was freelance, so I have a kind of sense of what it's like to not know where my next paycheck's coming from, and not know what my next job's going to be. And so I've always kind of I've gotten used to it, you know. So the transition wasn't super dramatic, although yoga came along for me in a beautiful way, because I had really reached the end of my sort of patience for living in Hollywood and pursuing the the Oscar or whatever it is, you know. And so when I came into yoga, it was really beautiful, because it was I never envisioned being a yoga teacher, and certainly never envisioned being a Kirtan artist. Yoga really began as a real, very personal practice. And so, I think for me, the biggest challenge now, since we've been, I guess, working as yoga teachers and as Kirtan artists, and, i.e. making our living, and having it be something where there's, you know, a financial aspect to it. For me, the biggest challenge of the transition has been kind of balancing the idea of it being a very personal inward practice, and yet also you know, making my living doing it, and even things like this, you know, doing something like Facebook live interview, and promotion and marketing and things like this, because at the core, you know, still for me, you know, yoga is a personal thing. And so as I reach out and as I share our music and as I teach and things like this, then I'm always kind of having to balance that aspect of, you know, I ask myself this question a lot, which is, would I keep singing Kirtan if I wasn't getting paid? You know, would I keep pursuing yoga study and teaching if I wasn't getting paid? And, you know, I kind of tell myself that the answer has to be yes, or else it doesn't feel very authentic. So that was kind of my piece. How about you?
So I was working corporate retail for until pretty much until I met Rob. And what happened to me was I was downsized in one of the companies I worked for, and after about a half day of complete tears and hopelessness, I had this epiphany, this aha moment of, I'm free. And I didn't have to go back. I didn't have to go back to that 9 to 5. I knew there was more for me. There's more that interested me outside of the box. And so what I did was, since I was a retail buyer, I found actually a job buying for yoga boutiques. And so I applied and got that job, and at the same time got my teacher training. So I was able to have one foot in my corporate work, those skills to help me transition into yoga. So then once I kept doing...
Were you already yoga then when you were working in the corporate world?
I was buying all kinds of things. I worked for the North Face, I worked for Nordstrom, so just different areas.
I think she asked if you were practicing yoga. Did you ask if you were practicing yoga?
Working.
Oh, working. Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
It's breaking out a little bit.
So then I was able to utilize my past to help fund my future. And well, in many ways actually. But so then I eventually let go of the buying completely and was able to transition into the yoga world. And it has been difficult for me because I do like structure, and I've had to learn how to create my own. And I also liked knowing the regular paycheck coming in. So, but Rob's helped me a lot with that because he's so used to it. He's been able to temper me a little bit and finding a little bit more ease in the fluidity of how that works. So I wouldn't say it was a breeze, or it is a breeze. I would say that it's constant practice. I mean, the practice itself has definitely helped the transition.
I love how you had a half a day.
I did.
Yeah, it's like it didn't last very long, did it? She was devastated for a half a day.
No need to dwell. Yoga was already working.
She just gets right into it.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I think maybe you don't too much with holding on to the past.
Yeah. But, let it go.
Yeah. I think, Rob, what you mentioned about, when you're doing something that's your passion and checking in with yourself, is this something that I would still do even if you know, I wasn't being paid for it is something that's, you know, anybody who creates a business out of their passion, you know, needs to be continually checking in with. And so I definitely appreciate that aspect of that. And yeah, so the both of you ended up kind of gravitating towards the same style of yoga, which is Bhakti Yoga. Now, is that something that you guys kind of discovered together or independent of each other? Or how did you end up on the path of Bhakti Yoga?
Yeah, we did discover it essentially together.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as we said before, you know, when we met, neither of us were practicing Bhakti Yoga at all, nor did we sing Kirtan. I had been to one Krishna Das Kirtan, you know, that somebody in LA sort of dragged me to, and I thought it was a nice experience, but it wasn't really anything momentous. And then, but when we met, we were both coming out of long-term relationships with other people, and we both had this kind of similar feeling that we wanted to be in both those relationships were unfulfilling for us, and we wanted to be in basically a more devotional relationship, and one in which there was a little more excitement, that we were both more excited to be in the relationship, and we both kind of had this mentality of like, we want that devotional relationship, or we don't want to be in a relationship at all. And so when we met each other, and we, you know, really began to connect, that idea became a big focus for us both. And so this idea of devotion actually kind of came in long before Bhakti Yoga, that there was this idea of devotion that was growing between us. And so then as we began to gravitate towards Bhakti Yoga, which really began when I wrote a song, because I was also a singer-songwriter, and as I was getting out of film, I was getting more interested in my music. And I was writing sort of uplifting songs about love and peace, things like this, and was playing actually in spiritual centers, going around to some sort of new age spiritual centers, like the Center for Spiritual Living and places like that. And a yoga teacher heard a song that I sang called Breathe. And she assumed that I was a yogi, and she assumed that the song was a yoga song, and she began playing it in her yoga class. And next thing you know, she called me and offered me to come and sing a kirtan at her yoga studio. And I said, sure, you know, and I didn't really know what I was getting into, but I did a couple covers of Krishna Das songs and played a few of my, you know, uplifting English songs, and everyone liked it, and they kept asking us to come back. And then it took me and at that same time, Melissa was getting her yoga teacher training. So I was starting to lead Kirtan, and she was starting to do her yoga teacher training. And then someone asked me to teach a mantra class, and I said yes. And, you know, all this kind of stuff was coming organically, and I think took me by surprise, that's for sure. But the more that I did it, the more I fell in love with it. So it was really that original devotion between the two of us. And then as we got into yoga, we just found naturally the yoga of devotion, so Bhakti Yoga. So that's how it kind of started. Is there anything you want to add to that?
No, that was just it. It just, the opportunities just kept coming in, and we just kept saying yes, and it felt good. And it started to really come together when Rob was teaching the mantra class, and we weren't getting many people coming in because mantra just seemed just so out there. So we combined it into a restorative class while we sang mantra, and then we would sing a little kirtan at the end, and then people started coming, and then we'd get questions, would you ever consider doing just a mantra class? So it kind of went full circle.
Yeah, that's it. When are you going to just do a mantra class?
But
didn't
that
show up for that one.
So that was really the kickoff into what we do now is the combining the mantra and the asana and then just full on singing.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a beautiful story. And I think too that there's a little nugget of wisdom in there for yoga teachers, I think too, because sometimes they can be really attached to what they're offering and it may not be resonating with people, and having that flexibility to kind of meet people where they are and help them wade in the water, right? To where they can be a little more open to something that feels maybe a little too foreign to them at that moment. So I think that's really beautiful how you guys helped people make that transition, and that you were open to that, to adjusting that. And that's great. And I guess for yogis or non-yogis who are watching that may not know what Bhakti Yoga is, can you share just a little bit of what the practice of Bhakti is, and what the practice, how it serves you in your life?
So Bhakti Yoga is usually called the yoga of devotion. Sometimes it's called the way of love. Yoga is one of those, words that has lots of different ways to view it. But the simplest way to think about it is that it's, yoga means union, and that anything that brings us into union with spirit, or anything that brings us even union of our masculine, our feminine, and anything that brings us into this sense of unity and oneness can be considered a yoga. So there's many forms of yoga, and in fact, even some people, a great carpenter may actually be practicing yoga as he's building something, if the intention behind it is strong enough. But so Bhakti Yoga is this idea that through our devotion that we can come into this union. And so, and Bhakti Yoga specifically tends to be connected with offering devotion to the yogic deities. So Ganesha, who's actually right here behind us. I think you can see a little bit of Ganesha there. He is. Anyway, Ganesha is the elephant-headed deity, and represents wisdom and discernment and removing of obstacles. And then there's many other deities, and that Bhakti Yoga traditionally is based on the idea of offering ourselves, offering worship or devotion to these deities. Specifically, what we do mostly is the practice of Kirtan. And Kirtan is the singing of the names of these deities, and we sing it in a group format, and it's call and response, and it's very joyful, and it's very meditative, and oftentimes also very ecstatic. So that's the quickest definition I can come up with for Bhakti Yoga. Does that seem clear? What do you think? You got anything to offer too?
Yes, I think just to maybe clarify for people too, it's not necessarily a specific set of asanas or something. It's more about the intention of what you're doing in all aspects of your life, right? Is that sense of devotion there with everything that you're doing?
Yeah, you just cut out a little bit, but yeah, it certainly is it's the devotional essence behind the activity that would kind of put into the bhakti world. Yeah.
And one thing also, because I know that some people struggle with the aspect of the deities. I think particularly, if people are non-religious, or maybe they're religious, and their faith, they feel like they're betraying their faith by practicing it. Is this something that people can practice and not attach to a religious aspect of it? Or, can you help maybe provide a little bit of insight on that role of whether religion is involved in it or not, and how people can approach that? Let's say if they are religious and they, don't necessarily want to feel like they're betraying their faith in some way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you had a nice thought. You were talking earlier.
Well, for me, the way that I got into this practice was just through singing. Mm-hmm. And just singing the mantra. And I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know what Bhakti Yoga was. All I knew was that I was chanting this mantra from, guidance of a few teachers and then what we were learning. And what happened for me was that it felt good. And then I noticed at the end that I felt a vibration in my body, and I felt joyful and lit up, and I looked around me and everyone else was feeling lit up, and I felt connected to the people in that room, like we had just experienced something together, and no one had defined it. There was no definition, and it felt good. And I was like, well, if this feels good, I want to do it again. Why not? All I did was sing. So for me, I wasn't signing up for anything except for this feeling that was, something I created within myself, and we all created together. And I thought, well, if that's it, then, there's no attachment to anything else around it. And then eventually I learned about, the stories of the deities and more about it. And that to me just enriched whatever, the mantra and what I was practicing. And so there wasn't, for me, an outgoing connection. As I learn more, I see that there is, but it's not necessary. Mm-hmm. And you're not signing up for joining anything, religious or anything like that. It's just a deepening of a connection with yourself. Again, that unity, and whatever that is. People call it spiritual. People just call it joy. They call it energy, vibration. So it's whatever you want to call it, I think. And so for me, that's helped resolve that question of connection. Is it religious? Because it doesn't, those are separate things, in my experience of that feeling tone, and then the mental connection to what religion is. So I think you can take it in India or in other places, people can take it to a religious, even fundamentalist approach, but you don't have to. It doesn't have to be anything except what it is for you and your personal experience.
So a couple of things that come up for me, and one I think is at the core of it, at the core of like Indian philosophy, yogic philosophy, is there? Well, there's a statement from the Vedas, which are some of the original scriptures and texts from yoga, and from India, 5,000 years old or more, which is that the truth is one, and that wise men call it by different names. So there's this underlying idea that that there's sort of one existing truth, and that we label it in all kinds of different ways. So we label it as Ganesha, we label it as Shiva, we label it as Jesus, we label it as God. There's all these different words that we use to describe, but we're all describing the same thing. And that's the biggest hurdle, I think, because I know that we come across it a lot, where we have people who are really very, very religious, and they come and they like our energy and they like the experience, but they find it difficult to come back on a regular basis because they feel like they're cheating on Jesus or whatever, right. whatever religious background that they have, or they're so disconnected from the idea that that there is divinity at all, and so then they struggle with the fact that that we talk about our divine nature and things like this. So and then so if you can't get on board with that idea that it's all kind of one, and that we're just using, it's my favorite part about yoga, and my favorite part about Bhakti Yoga too, is that no one is saying like Hanuman's the only way, no one is saying that Shiva is the only way. It's like, oh, well, if you like Shiva, well, then work with Shiva. And like, oh, you like Hanuman, well, then work with Hanuman. In the same way, it's very inclusive. Oh, you like Jesus? will then work with Jesus. In fact, in India, in southern India, where Christian is, very lots of Christians in southern India, we saw repeated times we would see pictures of Ganesha and Jesus, not two pictures next to each other, but one picture that one artist has made with both of their images like floating there in some divine celestial sky together, you know. And so this is the biggest hurdle that I find is because then once you have that understanding, then, you know, I can still, you know, I like to say that actually Bhakti Yoga, because I was agnostic my whole life. I certainly didn't believe in, you know, religions per se. But yet through Bhakti Yoga, I've actually developed a much greater understanding and acceptance and even forgiveness around all my sort of my own internal concepts of religion, you know, and my relationships with religious people has shifted. I feel less judgment, you know, all this kind of stuff. There's a great movie called Life of Pi. There's a book as well. And in the Life of Pi, the character he's a Muslim, Hindu, Christian, this young kid. And he has this wonderful moment where he looks up at the sky and he says, "Dear Vishnu, thank you for introducing me to Jesus." To me, that was like, that's it, you know. Anyway, so I think these are my thoughts on that.
What sounds kind of what I take away from that is that Bhakti Yoga can actually kind of serve as a container for you to explore your own thoughts, your own beliefs about religion or about deities or about God, or that it's not necessarily even that you must come and you must believe in some form of God, but you can come and kind of explore and maybe learn more about yourself and process all of this. So I think that's actually really an interesting way to look at it that I hadn't thought about before. So yeah, that's great.
Well, that brings up one more thought though too, is because they also say that these mantras are so powerful and potent, and they have a vibratory quality which has healing aspects to it, that they say you don't even need to know what they mean. You don't need to know the stories about the deities. You don't even need to have an image of the deity. You can literally just sing the mantra and experience the benefits simply by the sound quality. So that's what I was saying. You really no one's asking anybody to sign up for anything. You can just come and have an experience, and your experience can be completely unique.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you for answering that question, because I think a lot of people think of that or wonder about that, and I think that serves for some trepidation, as you know, it looks interesting and they want to try it, and they're, you know, just not quite there ready to take that step into the classroom. So and and Bhakti Yoga,
we come that a lot.
The practice of Bhakti Yoga is first introduced in the Bhagavad Gita. So is that something that you can share a little bit about? You know, I know a lot of people who are yoga teachers probably get exposed to that material in their training, but there's probably a lot of others who haven't read it. And actually, last year we were interviewing Sarah Joy Marsh at the conference, and she said something that I found kind of relieving. She said a lot of people in yoga don't like to read it because it's about war, or war is part of the text. And I was like, yeah, that sounds like me. But I have actually started reading it. It is a little bit, it's in verse. So I feel like that actually kind of makes it easier to read, but it is dense in that there is a lot to think about when you read that text. But can you share a little bit about the Bhagavad Gita and maybe a little summary or synopsis of this story that's told, and why it pertains to yoga?
Yes. You go.
You go?
You go.
No, you go. Yeah, so the Bhagavad Gita um, it means the song of the Lord. So Gita means song. Um, and it's a very short little excerpt that lands right in the middle of one of the Indian epics called the Mahabharata. And so and this epic is over 100,000 verses of Sanskrit. And right in the middle of this is this conversation between Arjuna and Krishna. Krishna in this story is an incarnation of God himself, but in this specific moment, he is the charioteer because he has vowed to stay out of this war. But he is the charioteer. He was vowed not to fight in the war, but he's the charioteer for Arjuna. And Arjuna is a great warrior and is leading the one, essentially the good side in this battle. There's lots of different reasons why people say that this is takes place on a battlefield, but ultimately, the best way, really simplest way to look at it is that the battlefield is an allegory for our consciousness, in which only the most peaceful, serene members of society don't have a battle going on in their head every single day. I mean, I've got one going on right now, but I'll save that for later. But that, and then especially as we start to try to evolve, that battle can get stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. And so, so the Bhagavad Gita is essentially what happens is at the beginning of this battle, Arjuna falls to his knees, and he's in despair because there are so many family members on both sides of the battlefield. So he knows that he's going to have to fight with many of his closest family members, including his guru and his main teacher, who just because of the circumstances happened to be on the other side of the line. And he falls to his knees and says, "I can't fight." The rest of the next 18 short chapters is just merely a conversation between Krishna and Arjuna. And the conversation essentially is Krishna, who, as I said, is the incarnation of God, is convincing Arjuna that the right thing to do is to stand up and fight. And I think this is where most people get hung up. Why would God tell us to fight, in a battle? And I think that's one of the biggest themes is trying to get to the bottom of that question, and I think it's something we have to work our way through. I don't think someone can just tell you, how to explain that to yourself, and that's part of the process of working with the Bhagavad Gita is finding some understanding around why it's happening on the battlefield. And there's lots and lots of different ideas and different reasons different scholars will come up with. But there's in the Bhagavad Gita, so many different themes. It's considered a handbook of day-to-day life. It was Gandhi's. He read it every day. Gandhi, who is, of course, that's even contrasting back to what we just said about the fact that it's on a battlefield. And we've got Gandhi, who's the greatest, advocate of non-violence or ahimsa. Yet his text, his scripture, his Bible was the Bhagavad Gita. So clearly there's something beyond the violent outside appearance. But there's three kinds of yoga that get mainly mentioned, even though they say that each chapter is a yoga, that there's 18 chapters and that there's 18 yogas being described. But the three that really stand out are Jnana Yoga, which is the yoga of wisdom, and Karma Yoga, which is the yoga of action, and then Bhakti Yoga, which is the yoga of devotion. And so I like to think of it as the Bhagavad Gita is telling us how to think, how to act, and how to feel. ultimately, as a bhakta, as a person who practices Bhakti Yoga, it's my interpretation that the Bhagavad Gita claims that the Bhakti Yoga is the highest form of yoga. But again, there's some disagreement amongst the scholars in that regard. So anyway, so that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great summary, and I think you really touched on some of those points that, like you mentioned, that people struggle with. That, but I love how you said it's open for people to interpret on their own and to dive into on their own and go through their own process of deciding what it means. And I think that's great. And you both recently traveled to India and had the opportunity to study the Bhagavad Gita in person there. Can you share a bit about that experience with us?
Yeah, I should tell a little bit about maybe how we met Vanamali.
Yeah, so we both had been, since we've started studying the Bhagavad Gita, very interested in it and reading it a lot, diving into it more and more, and just one of our favorite texts. When we were in India, we were in a shop talking to a man who's going to help us arrange a taxi for the next day. And the day before, we had gone into the bookshop, and I had picked up a book by an author named Vanamali, and it was a Shakti book. So it was talking all about the different goddesses, and I had dove right in that night. And meanwhile, Rob had been reading another Vanamali book. There was a whole bunch of them in the library and where we were staying. So back to the store, we're talking to this man, and we get to talking, and he mentions his Mataji, which is like Mata is mother, and Ji is like a friendly and reverent name to call a friend, Mataji. And we're like, well, who's your Mataji? And he said, oh, her name's Vanamali. And we both kind of stopped, and we looked at him and each other, and we're like, Vanamali the writer? And he's like, yeah, Vanamali the writer. She lives here, right up the hill. Oh. And we're like, what? He goes, yeah, she just got back from London. She has meditation every night at 6. You should go. So we're like, let's go. So we started sitting with her every night. And then within a few days, she said, by the way, I'm going to be teaching a course on the Bhagavad Gita to a group of they were Christian. They were Catholic priests. Catholic priests. And you're welcome to join. And we're like, what? Okay, so yes. And then she found out the date was wrong, and we were set to leave. And she's like, but I can start it right now and just see where we get to. And we're like, oh my gosh. Okay. So we started sitting with her every day. We hit about a chapter a day. And she would sing to us the Bhagavad Gita in Sanskrit, and then she would interpret it for us word for word. And we ended up extending our stay until we finished, because it was one of the most magical experiences we'd ever had. And to have the Gita is so complicated, as you said, as you started reading it, and it takes a while. Like each line you could take weeks with. You could just dive in and figure out like all the different talks to you, each line. And so to have that daily dialogue and to be able to ask questions it was very profound for us and life-changing to be able to be taught from a scholar who studied it her whole life. Mm-hmm. It brought so much new light to the Gita for us.
And not just a scholar, because Vanamali is a supreme bhakta. I mean, she is like it's not just coming from a scholarly point of view. Vanamali, her name is a name of Krishna, and she literally every single morning for an hour she does her morning puja. She says the 1,000 names of Vishnu. And it takes an hour, and she lays out a flower petal on her altar for each name. and builds this beautiful multicolored mandala. And this she does 365 days a year. And every night at 6 p.m. she opens her door as well, again to her ashram, very small ashram, and she presents. She'll do a meditation and a little kirtan and a puja and an arti. So this whole thing, and this happens every single night of the year as well. And not to mention, she doesn't charge anything for it. You know, she lives off of her writing, and so it's just such this generous offering. We ended up spending the entire month. We did a chapter a day for 18 days, and then with a couple of days on either end to like a intro day and a sum up day. And even that really didn't feel like enough, but to hear it also in Sanskrit, to hear it sung. I mean, she would literally sing the whole chapter to us in Sanskrit and then break it down in translation. Because again, the vibratory quality just of the Sanskrit alone is so powerful. So it was really super, super unique experience. And then we were actually able to go back the next year, and we spent another 10 days with her. And we also led a retreat in India, and we were able to bring our group and sit with her in satsang as well. And so, and the goal is to go back and see her again next year.
This year.
This year. We'll go back and see her again this year. And she wants to, we were talking about maybe, she's talking about teaching the Ramayana, which is the story of Ram and Sita, which is another big favorite of mine. She translates the Puranas is mostly what she writes. Including the Bhagavad Gita, she's done a translation of her own.
I can imagine, I mean, that's such a phenomenal thing to get to experience that. If I can just imagine at night you guys must have been looking at each other saying, is this really happening?
Every day.
Yeah.
Every day. We'd walk down the hill and just look at each other, because every morning we'd climb to the top of the hill and go to her little ashram, and then we were only there for a couple of hours a day, every day we'd walk down the hill and, just in amazement. Yeah.
And are her writings available in the United States?
Yeah.
They are. Yeah. You can find most of her books have been printed here. I actually read her before we ever went to India. I read my first Vanamali book. I checked it out at the Seattle Public Library.
Okay.
So yeah, she is available. And she has a lovely book on Hanuman that I know just came out in the States, and has an introduction by Krishna Das. And it tells the story of the Ramayana, but through Hanuman's eyes. It's pretty sweet.
And then when you guys go in November to India, you guys are actually taking a group there, right? I mean, people can sign up to travel with you, and then they'll have the opportunity to study with her as part of that trip.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, that's like a pretty amazing opportunity. So.
Yeah.
And then part of what you guys are offering at the conference is going to be a workshop on the Bhagavad Gita. And so, can you share just a little bit about how you're taking that knowledge that you gained from studying with her and offering that to the attendees of the conference through that workshop?
Yeah, it's called the Bhakti Toolbox, Gifts of the Gita. We did a series of workshops last year. They were actually series. They were a series of series. And the Bhagavad Gita was one of those. We did it in a 4-week series. And one of the things that happened with Vanamali was at the end, she wasn't asking for any payment or anything for the course that we did with her for the month. And we said, well, how in the world can we possibly repay you? And she said, go back and teach what I've shared with you, And of course, this immediately felt very, very daunting, because although we love the Gita and it's, we read it constantly and we talk about it all the time, and it's part of our life, and it's part of our yoga practice, the idea of teaching the Bhagavad Gita suddenly, does that mean, are we supposed to be scholars? But but it was very clear, you know, her sort of directive seemed very clear. And so one of the first things that we did when we got back last year was to commit ourselves to doing the course. And it turned out to be really, really wonderful. Now we'd led some book clubs in the past too and things like that. So there has been but so this idea of teaching the Gita really is a way to offer something back to Vanamali. This is really the impetus for us of why we're doing it. I mean, we definitely think that the teachings are valuable, and of course, but at its core, this is like us trying to pay her back for the gifts that she's given us. In terms of the workshop at the conference, you know, we're going to take 20 days, or take a month worth of knowledge. We're going to compress it down into 2 hours. And you're going to get it all. Guaranteed.
Direct injection.
Yeah. But well, no, you know, it's going to be a little more experiential and a lot less sort of lecture-y than like our experience with Vanamali. There's going to be a little bit of us talking, setting it up for people. But we're bringing just a couple of very, what we think are some of the most important themes of the Bhagavad Gita, and bringing in some exercises in which we can try to embody those and feel those in our body. And then a very important part of it will be we'll end up with some what we would call satsang, or discussion around it, you know, because I think one of the biggest things, the biggest challenge for anybody who wants to kind of touch into the Bhagavad Gita is it's really, really difficult just to read it and to get it. You know, that we kind of need to hear from other people what they're thinking about it. We kind of need to hear other people's experiences and thoughts about it. And then so many of the ideas, even if you get clear on what the ideas are, they're so challenging. You know, one of the main themes is to like act without expectation. You know, and for us in the West, like, what does that mean? Like, does that mean go to work without expecting a paycheck? And at its essence, it kind of does, you know? And so how do we like incorporate some concept like that into our, you know, day-to-day life and into this world of sort of like, you know, we do something and then we expect something back. And it's about sort of acting without being attached to we call the fruits of our action. And without some sort of discussion, without some sort of trying to find a way to make that relevant, it can just seem so daunting that we don't even try. Yeah. So I think that's kind of the gist of what we're going to be doing at the conference.
I really appreciate that aspect of the dialogue and the conversation around it, because I think it can be really hard for people to find the opportunity for that dialogue. And so that your workshop and the conference provides a great container for that to happen. And, you know, I will kind of volunteer this for you because I think you won't mind, but you guys will be around at the conference throughout the weekend. So people can reach out to you as well, right? Like they take it, they're still processing something, and they can say, hey, Rob and Melissa. And I'm sure that you guys would be, you know, very open to continue.
Absolutely. It's our favorite part.
We love to talk about it. I'm always like, what? It's over? We have to go on? No, we just started.
It is a process. Yeah, it will continue to work on us. And it is a handbook for daily living. So the beautiful thing about the conversation is continuing to implement it so that we can use it as tools.
For me, I think a lot of people, especially yogis, you know, are like, wow, what is this Bhagavad Gita thing? I'm interested in it. Everyone's talking about it, but every time I try to pick it up, you know, it's so thick and it's so dense, and I just don't quite get it, and I haven't found a good translation yet, and things like that. And to me, like, if we could just open the door, for people to kind of see a way in, that would be a lot. That would, to me, that would be a huge, huge, huge thing. So in terms of my own personal relinquishing of expectations, of my work, relinquishing the expectation that everyone that comes to the workshop will walk out enlightened, then that would be easier for me. So, but I think if we could just open the door to this idea that, hey, I could explore the Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah.
I don't need to be so afraid of it.
Opening up possibilities for people to realize that it's not necessarily as intimidating as they thought it was, or maybe it is, but they can manage it and manage way through the text. So I think that's great. And so part of another thing that you guys offer beyond doing the Bhagavad Gita classes, that you guys also do Kirtan. And, a lot of people, that's, it's gaining momentum, I think, in the yoga world, but I think there's still a lot of people who don't necessarily understand what it is. Can you share a little bit about what Kirtan is and how that's a part of your practice?
Yes. Kirtan is the call and response of mantra, chanting mantra, usually set to music. And in our case, we set it to more of a Western melody, although we use a harmonium, which is typically an Indian instrument, which is like what is it called? Accordion meets a piano. You kind of bellow and then play the keys. It's usually the most fascinating part of a kirtan. If anyone's new, they all come up and like, what is that instrument? And then Rob plays the guitar. And it is, for me, it is a joyful experience of the divine. It is a joyful celebration and just of people coming together in community and sharing in something uplifting. And whether or not, like we said earlier, whether or not you know what the mantra means, just the vibratory quality of it begins to work its way in and start to heal you. It's like prana, life energy moving through you. It starts to open up your channels, and then it's this connection of community coming together, and we're all doing this together. And so usually it's one of us leading the chant, and then everyone in the group calling back or responding back. So call and response. And it can be meditative and melodic, and it can be totally ecstatic, people on their feet hooting and hollering. So it is just kind of what the collective brings together in that energy. So
I think other aspect of kirtan that I think is really great, especially for yoga teachers, but for all of us, I think a lot of people talk about, difficulty finding their voice, or, feeling, and there's just something about the experience of singing in that group energy like that, because for the most part, unless you're leading it, you're not on the spot, and there's music going on, and everyone else is singing really loud, and so you're not being judged, for whether you're a good singer or a bad singer or any of that. No one's looking at you when you're singing. There's a freedom that can come from participating, and I think that to me is a really valuable piece of it. Our voice, opening up our throat chakra, for lack of a better way to describe it. So
the concept of being heard, like of that communication center opening up and hearing yourself, being heard without judgment, because everyone else is in it together. So it's a very inclusive and I think quite uplifting experience.
Yeah, I think too, one thing that I've enjoyed when I've participated is that, you know, when you are singing, like you mentioned, I mean, everyone's singing together. So it's not like, you don't really even have to be like, am I singing right this way or that way? You can just kind of release and just let it out and not be too concerned about how good your singing is sounding at that moment, you know, and just kind of be more present in the moment and let go of those constraints that you might feel otherwise singing, and being concerned with those things.
Yeah, I think, you know, sort of surrendering that whole concept of whether I'm a good singer or a bad singer or whatever is a big part of the experience, you know, that just almost like giving yourself permission, just the giving yourself permission to sing, is, you know, for a lot of people is just a huge leap, you know, of faith. Because it's amazing how many people I've come across now since we've been doing this that just say without even thinking, oh, I can't sing, you know, or, oh, I don't have a good voice. Or, I mean, it's amazing how ingrained that is in so many people's consciousness. And I believe the complete opposite. I think there's nobody who can't sing, you know. And so when we come to Kirtan, we're kind of meeting somewhere in the middle, you know, because no one's asking you to like get up and do an aria in front of 100 people or anything, you know. But you're also, just by walking in the door, you know, you're giving yourself a permission to try, to at least try. And that's what I always say, you know, say even if you've come to Kirtan, give it a shot, give it your best effort. Don't worry about what other people think. And then, you know, and then see what you experience, you know, because I don't know what you're going to experience. Everybody's experience is completely different and unique. And maybe it's for you and maybe it's not. But if you come and you sit there and you don't sing and you don't even try, then you really haven't experienced Kirtan. And so you don't know if it's going to be beneficial or not.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And, you know, something I've always been curious about, there's a call and response aspect to it. Is there a purpose for that, or is it just like instructional so people know what the mantra is? Or I've just always been curious. I don't know if you guys have an answer for that or not, but
I love this question because
we've never got that question.
It's never
before.
been asked.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just like, oh, it's call and response. Okay, cool.
You're like, oh shoot.
I like it. But we had a few thoughts on it.
We had some thoughts.
One, you know, not the no claiming to know exact, you know, but one is that, you know, Indian philosophy and was all passed down orally, and the way that texts were related and taught was oral, but also chanting. Like, I'll chant a line of the Gita, you chant a line of the Gita, and that's how the memorization came in. So that's one reason. Another reason is, for me, like when we sing, sometimes at the end of a mantra we'll yell out bolo, which means you sing, chant, you know, like join me, your turn. You could think of it like that. And so it's like we're enlivening each other, like I'll sing, you sing, we all sing, you know. It's like this, it's like building this momentum, because usually in Kirtan, like it starts slow and then you build as people get to know the mantra, and there's that repetition, and you're in this meditation and you're all in the same breathing cycle, and it's all this, like this whole live entity, you know, working together. So so I think the call and response is like, you know, we're really building up the energy, but I think it's also a memorization tool that's been passed down.
And maybe there's also a practical aspect that you get a break. Do you know what I mean? Like everybody gets a break. You know, everybody gets to breathe for 10 seconds while the other, you know, the leader gets to break for 10 seconds while the people are responding, or vice versa, you know, while the leader is singing, you know, and so because if you didn't get that break,
true.
you know, it could be a little
It's
challenging.
quite exhausting.
It could be pretty exhausting.
Yeah.
Because every now and then, sometimes I'll say, let's sing it all together, keep going, you know. You can feel the energy builds, but at the same time, you know, you can start to feel like people are, you know, people
Get out of that breath
people
rhythm.
people need to breathe too. So
So I'm just
So hopefully,
just made me think about, you know, for me personally at the conference, at the end of each day, on one hand, I'm completely exhausted, but on the other hand, there's so much energy going on, and so I have a really hard time unwinding and sleeping at the end of the night of the conference. And I'm wondering if it's similar for you when you guys do Kirtan, because you just are like buzzing off of all this vibration and energy that's going on. Do you guys experience that?
yes.
Yeah. Like 2 a.m. in the morning, you're like, should we?
Yeah.
Certainly,
Yeah.
couple hours where, you know, it's too hard to. No, there's no sleep right after Kirtan.
No, and sometimes, you know, depending on the Kirtan and the intensity or whatever, I mean, it's I'll lay in bed till 2 a.m., you know, with the mantra in my head, and I'll wake up at 6 a.m. with the mantra still going again, you know, and totally exhausted, but at the same time, totally, you know, buzzed from the experience. So, yeah, it's why we like our Monday night kirtans. They start at 7 p.m. So
we get to bed by a decent hour.
Bed, you know. But sometimes we start at 8 and we're not done till 10, and then we can't get people out till 11, and then, you know,
it's an all-nighter.
It's an all-nighter. So,
and what would you say from your experience now, because you guys have a really strong roots in the Pacific Northwest yoga community, but you guys have also done a lot of traveling around the world. You guys did accompanied a retreat recently in Spain. You guys have been guiding these trips now to India, and I feel like there's somewhere else I saw you in the world recently. But I guess what has been one of the most...
Went to Italy.
Where'd you go?
We were in Italy.
Oh,
we had a kirtan in Rome and a kirtan in Assisi.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay.
Yeah.
So you guys are, you know, really in the world of being a kirtan artist, and I guess I'm just curious, what has been probably one of the more surprising aspects of the experience that you didn't realize would be part of it going into it, or that's just really kind of taking your breath away about the experience has been a beautiful part of this?
There's a couple. I think it's the people that we meet. It's for me, it's the community and the transformations that I see from people who walk in, like, we're come in with this pre-programmed belief that they can't sing, to fully emoting and singing with all their heart and heads thrown back, and the light that comes on. And to me, that makes it, without attachment to the fruit, that makes it totally worth it for me, because that's all I would want for anyone, is to feel that joy.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Yeah, so for me, I think I'd have to agree. I mean, the way back a few years ago, we were at a Jai Uttal workshop in Brighton Bush, Oregon, and I was just beginning to talk about my desire to do this as work, and to be a kirtan singer, and there's a tabla player. His name is Daniel Paul, and he looked at me and he said, well, you won't make very much money, but you sure will meet a lot of great people along the way. and everything he said has come true. But but at the same time, and I don't want to disparage that. I don't want to make a joke about the money aspect, because actually the thing that takes my breath away,
Mm-hmm.
and the thing that continually surprises me, and kind of you know, oftentimes even keeps me going, is the fact that we actually have been able to make this our work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's still kind of astounding to me that we're able to, you know, I guess I just grew up so, you know, with that whole cultural thing that said, I mean, even though when you're in school, they, you know, they kind of give you that pep talk where, you know, just do what you love and the money will come kind of thing, you know. But then the world really tells you the opposite, you know, and the world kind of says, well, you know, there's some stuff you just got to do, and it doesn't matter whether you like it or not. And I never really, you know, got on board with either of those things. I never really quite understood how to kind of bring that into my experience. But so I'm still kind of, sometimes I'm like, wow, this is what we do. You know, we get to teach yoga and sing kirtan.
Mm-hmm.
And that's our whole, you know, our whole occupation. And I just feel just most of the time I feel, you know, pretty grateful for that.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, it's definitely, you have to have some trust in the universe to do some of these things that are not mainstream occupations, and do in some capacities rely on the generosity of others. And but I think there's a real beautiful gift in that as well, even though sometimes it can be challenging when you're looking at whatever the bill is that needs to be paid, and you're like, okay, you know. But you know, when I go through that some too with the conference, and he owns the outdoor guiding business, so I just have really had a lot of in the universe that I think, you know, it supports what needs to happen. So but I feel like the Seattle community has really embraced you guys, and it's just really wonderful to have you as part of our community. And you have just such sweet spirits about you, and it's such a blessing to get to have you at the conference each year and be in community with you. So thank you so much for that. And
Thank you.
yeah, and I guess you guys will be at the conference doing a kirtan on Friday night, and also teaching the workshop that we talked about earlier. But there's a lot of other opportunities for people to practice and study with you. So would you mind sharing where people can find more information about you, and maybe some of your regular offerings that you have?
Yeah. Easiest way to find us is robandmelissa.com. So that's super easy. And then also we're here on Facebook at Rob and Melissa.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a weekly kirtan on a Monday night in East Lake at a place called East Lake Yoga. And it's donation based, and it's at 7 p.m. The information's on our website too. And then we do a monthly kirtan at 8 Limbs on Phinney Ridge. And that one, unlike the Monday night kirtan we just started late last year, but that kirtan at Phinney Ridge, the monthly, we've been doing now for 2 or 3 years, maybe even longer, at least 3
to 4 years.
Oh my God. Anyway, for a long time, apparently. And so we have a really sweet community there. You know, sometimes we can have 60, 70, even 80 people. We have a band, and that's also donation based as well. We feel really fortunate to have, you know, these yoga studios be willing to support our donation based concept, because we really like to be able to offer it in that way. And it seems to work out for everybody, including us. And everybody who wants to come gets to come. So those are the two main events regular events that we have around the Seattle area. We're always offering different workshops, and like I said, last year we did the Bhakti Toolbox series, and we'll be doing that again. We do a couple 2 or 3 retreats every year as well. We have one in April, we have one in June, and then we have one back in November. We'll be back in India again. So all that can be found on our calendar or on our retreat page on our website.
And also, you mentioned we have 2 CDs, so that music is on our website. It's also on iTunes and CD Baby.
If they were going to look for iTunes, they search for Rob and Melissa Lundsgaard. Is that how they find it? Okay.
Just Rob and Melissa. Mm-hmm. I mean, they'll find it if they type in Lundsgaard, because my singer-songwriter name before I started doing Kirtan was Lundsgaard. So like Madonna.
Yeah,
just like the single name, like Madonna. Just think of, and start voguing any minute here. But the easiest thing is to just, the easiest thing is really to go to our website and then go to the music page, and then they'll have all the links to different places that you can purchase the music.
Okay, great. Well, thank you both so much for taking the time to chat this morning and share a bit more about yourselves and some of your insight and wisdom with Bhakti Yoga and the Bhagavad Gita. And I'm really looking forward to seeing you guys at the conference. And again, thank you for being with us, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Melissa.
For sure. Thank you, Melissa. Namaste.